Welcome to the morning Bhagavatam classes emanating from Spanish Fork, Utah. Before we do anything else, we have to give acknowledgement to our line of disciplic session and our specific guru, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, without whom we would still be standing in the darkest region of material ignorance. Good morning, Govinda Day. Om Agananti Maranda Syangana Gana Saraka Chaksurun Meditam Yana Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yana Bhutare Sayam Rupakaramayam Darati Swaparantikam Vandeham Sri Guru Siyata Parakamaram Sri Gurun Vaishnavam Sha Sri Rupam Sagadatam Sahagana Raganatam Vitam Samsadevam Sadvaitam Savarutam Parijana Sayitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Larita Sri Vishakan Vitam Sha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pastaya Bhutade Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Tanamane Namaste Sarasati Devi Guruvani Pachani Nevashes Sunyvari Bhaskada Desana Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare Hare Narayanam Namaskritam Naram Cheva Narottamam Devim Sarasatam Vyasam Tato Jayodhyarat Nashta Prayasho Badresu Nityam Bhagavata Seva Bhagavati Uttama Shikhi Bhakti Bhavati Naistiki Nigamal Kapaturu Garitam Phalam Shukamakaramrita Travisamitam Pibata Bhaktam Ashamarya Mohora Hora Sikabhuvi Bhagavakaha. Good morning, Manasaganga. Good morning, Anjali. Who is it having surgery this morning? Is it your daughter, or I couldn't quite discern that. Anyway, our prayers go out for a successful procedure. Good morning, Bill from Southern California. It's Transcendental Tuesday, Prashant and Sachi from right here in Utah. If you're from Utah, we do have services on Saturday nights at 7 o'clock right in the downtown center in Mill Creek. Otherwise, if you want good association, look up the nearest of the 700 Krishna temples to you. Good morning, Taruna and Jimmy from Minnesota. Thank you for your kind donation just the other day. Much appreciated during these lean times. Well, I can't remember when we've taken one day for one verse. These verses are so full of nectar. There's so much, good morning, Radhesham, there's so much you could say about them that we've taken at least minimum of 2 days on each verse, 45-minute talks each time. Most, our norm has become pretty much a week. Our whole Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday segments generally just go to one verse, part 1, part 2, and part 3. Your daughter, okay. Well, everybody, will you join me in wishing Anjali's daughter a successful surgical procedure? I believe it's taking place tomorrow. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Actually, swasti, the swastik got a bad name because of Hitler lifting it from the Sanskrit culture and misusing it. But prior to Hitler, swastik was a very positive icon, and it meant auspicity. And this is a mudra which the priest blesses someone. Om Swastino Govinda Swastino Chitanando Swastino Vasudeva Vishnuratu Swastino Narayano Narava Swastino Padmarapurusho Swastino Vishwaksena Vishesana Swastino Rishikeshwaratu Swastino Vinityari Swastino Anjanashita Hanavadu Swasti Samaganam Kesamahansikasha Satyana Nanagana Share Sarodatu. So we wish Swasti and auspiciousness, and if you give the name of your daughter in the comments, we'll be able to intone her name and more specifically direct our vibrations and good wishes to her. Did you know that at one time the American and British planes during the World War I era had certain types of planes had swastikas on them? So obviously at that time there was no negative connotation. It was simply thanks to Der Fuhrer that everyone reacts negatively to it. In fact, when we were building the temple in Salt Lake City, Dan Cummings, an excellent artist in glass engraving, had done a wonderful collage, a nice collage for the front door. The collage is still there. It's a beautiful engraving. But in the middle of the collage, he'd put a swastika. And while that has only positive connotations to us, alarm bells started ringing that might set off some visitor and caused vandalism or damage to the temple, so we arranged for the swastika to be redesigned. Okay. In any case, this is part 2 on Transcendental Tuesday, TT, of the 33rd verse, 2nd chapter, 1st canto, Srimad Bhagavatam. I'll read the verse once again as I did yesterday. You're welcome to follow along if you have it in front of you. Asho gunamaya bhavir bhuta shukshmendriyatmanabihi sha nimeteshu nirvishto bhunkte bhuteshu tadgunam. The supersoul enters into the bodies of the created beings who are influenced by the modes of material nature and causes them to enjoy the effects of these modes by the subtle mind. And here's the second paragraph of Prabhupada's purport. The Lord, as Paramatma, helps a living being to get material happiness because a living being is helpless in all respects in obtaining what he desires. We're parts, we're emanations, we're like sparks from the Supreme Controller. And we have some ability to control. Prabhupada gave the example that we put our little satellites in the sky and God floats his satellites, huge, huge planets. So God has creative power and we have creative power, but ours is very minute compared to his creative power. And in fact, we don't even have control over our own bodies. Food is digested, hair grows, nutrition is distributed through the blood to all the different vital organs of the body. But we don't have any control of that. We don't know how it's going on. We're not driving it. We're not motivating it. We didn't design the body in which we live. So even though we're sparks of the divine, eternal, full of bliss and knowledge, just like Lord Krishna, we don't have the power that he does. And so for all practical purposes, we as an individual tiny soul are residing within this material body helplessly. I'm not lifting that arm, but rather it's the super soul who accompanies the individual soul. That when I as an individual soul indicate to the super soul that I would like to lift my arm, he's the one, he's the controller. I'm not the controller. I don't even control my body, but he's the one, by his sanction, I lift my arm. It's something like being a passenger in the car. The car is the body. We are, as individual souls, the passengers, but Krishna or God, the super soul, is the driver. So however you want the car to go, you don't have the power to make it go faster, make it go slower, to cause it to do a U-turn, to drive it to New York, or to drive it to Quebec, or to drive it to Vancouver, to drive it to San Antonio. But you do have the power to indicate to the driver where you would like it to go. And Krishna, of course, would like to drive us back home, back to the spiritual world. He would like to take charge of the car because he knows the way how to get us back home, back to eternal life, bliss, and knowledge. However, he's also aware of the fact that we're not ready, nor are we willing to trust God and to surrender to his directions, to allow him to drive the vehicle and guide us in the proper way back home, back to Godhead. Therefore, he accepts directions from us, even though those directions are coming from a very limited, self-centered, skewered perspective. He still will be the order carrier to a certain point in order that we eventually come to a higher level of sobriety and consciousness. And then he's always been there. He's there for us now when we're errant, when we're engaged in non-God conscious activities, basically plunging ourselves into an oceanus of forgetfulness for Krishna, but he still stands by. He still supports us even in our waywardness, even as we generate negative karma and prolong our sojourn in this material world. And the reason he does that is he's showing us how faithful he is. He's showing us that if we depend upon him and if we allow him to direct our lives, he will do what he says he'll do, and he'll take us back to home, back to Godhead. So continuing here in the purport, Prabhupada says, the Lord, man proposes and God disposes. In another sense, the living beings are parts and parcels of the Lord. Therefore, they are one with the Lord. In the Bhagavad Gita, the living beings in all varieties of bodies have been claimed by the Lord as his sons. The sufferings and enjoyments of the sons are indirectly the sufferings and enjoyments of the Father. Still, the Father is not in any way affected directly by the suffering and enjoyment of the sons. He is so kind that he constantly remains with the living being as the Paramatma and always tries to convert the living being towards real happiness. In our present self-centered mode, Krishna washes his hands of the results. If we direct him to touch something, taste something, smell something, feel something, see something, out of a sense of independence and separateness from God, he'll make that happen. He will cater to our wayward desires, but what he will not do is accept the responsibilities. You're free to act. You're free to use or misuse your free will. God will facilitate that as the supreme controller, but where he draws the line is he's not going to, you have to be accountable. And that's part of growing up. Every parent tries to teach their children how to accept responsibility for their actions. As a child, they may steal something or they may say something harsh, and it's forgivable as a child. But it's not forgivable when the child, as a grown-up, steals something or speaks critically or complains or gossip. And so every parent tries to train up their child in such a way that they themselves can become parents. They themselves can become responsible, mature adults. And so Krishna allows us facility to misbehave, but he doesn't give us a pass on the karmic reactions. We have to assume the results of the karmic reactions because we're acting for our own self-interest, and so therefore the reaction shouldn't go to God, it should go to us. Because we're the actors, and so if you want to be the actor, then be mature enough, grow up enough to accept responsibility for the reaction. And Krishna's wiping his hands of our karmic reactions is part of his acting as a parent to grow us up. Nadati kasitid papam nadchaivam sukhiram aganina vitam gyanam tenam yanti jantavam. I do not take responsibility for the pious or impious reactions to the living being's activities as long as he's self-centered. Now, elsewhere he says, Namam karmani limpanti name karma phalospriyaha. God declares that he himself is free from karmic reactions. He's the lawgiver. He's the creator. It's by his orders that everything goes on. So he doesn't become liable for anything that he does. Not only is he not liable, but he says that for one who transforms their consciousness away from aham mameti, minus, I-ness, we live in a world of iPods and iPhones, and I. However, when we accept the process of devotional service under the guidance of a bona fide spiritual master, which begins by Sevan Mukhi Jivado, honoring the Lord with your tongue, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. When you transition from I-ness, self-centeredness, to God-centeredness, then he does. Then it's a new ball game. It's from dark to light, from down to up, from the back to the front. Then Krishna does assume the responsibility for the reactions, for activities that the devotees do, for which the Lord is the beneficiary. And that is a game changer. This verse, Prabhupada says, Anjali, 11th chapter, Bhagavad Gita, 55 verse. You'll all find the link in the comment section afterwards. Prabhupada says this verse is the essence of the Bhagavad Gita. Mad karma krin, mad paramo, mad bhakta sangavardita, nirvarasa vabhutishu yasamamiti pandava. Krishna says, my dear Arjuna, one who engages in my pure devotional service, free from the contaminations of fruitive activities. In other words, releasing the desire to enjoy the phal, the fruits of your activities, and free from mental speculation, who works for me, mad karma, mad paramo, making me my satisfaction, the supreme goal of life, and is friendly to every living entity, he certainly comes to me. So what you want to do is you don't want my karma. You don't want the karma to bounce back to you. And so therefore you want to tailor your life's activities in such a way as to honor and please God. That way you sidestep my karma and you get what Prabhupada calls Krishna karma. That whatever comes back to you is Krishna, 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 Krishna. As far as any activities that we do on the intellectual, the mental, the spiritual, or the physical plane, one should transfer one's energy entirely. Ihadasya haredasya manasa karmana gira. Mind, works, deeds. Ihadasya haredasya. In a mood of servant, not in a mood of enjoyment, not in a mood of sovereignty or proprietorship, not in the mood of being a master. But the transition basically involves thinking of oneself henceforward as a servant of God, not as the master. So if one does that, then the result is that all of one's energies become transferred entirely to Krishna conscious activities. Anashatasha visham yataram upanjandara nirbandha Krishna sambandhe yukta vairagya uchate. We often talk about matter and spirit as if they were two separate things. They are two separate energies. One is the superior energy, the internal energy of the Lord. The other is the external, inert energy of the Lord. But they come from the same source. God is ultimately the ultimate spirit. He's the omnipotent source of everything. And so, in a sense, all energies from the Supreme Spirit are spirit. Even what we call the material energy is really spiritual. It becomes material when we take it and we misuse it. We try to exploit it. We try to manipulate it for our own purposes. When the Lord's external energy becomes tainted by selfish motivations, when it becomes shunted away under the banner of family, friends, and country, instead of directed back to Him, instead of being consecrated to Him, then that category of energy becomes known as material. Otherwise, all energy is spiritual. And perfect mode of action is to give back to the Lord as He gives us all the necessities of life. We learn to acknowledge and recognize that through devotion, by using our tongue to honor the Lord and our ears to hear His glories. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Using our hands to work for the Lord, make flower garlands, or offer the arti to the Lord, or build the temple for the Lord. Use our money-making abilities to donate and support the temple activities, festivals, book printing, and so on and so forth. Our scientific endeavor to use all of that 100%, dovetail everything that we do, even our vocational activities, even our relational, even our family activities. The expert devotee learns to dovetail all of that in such a way that Krishna is honored. This is called Krishna karma. So rather than being focused on inert material things, rather than being enamored by the indirect energy of the Lord in the form of matter, one, in all of one's activities, thinks of Krishna, 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 Krishna. And then the result is, yam yam vapushmaram baba. As the air carries aromas, whatever it is that's foremost in one's thoughts at the time of death, that determines one's next birth. Just as the air from a garbage pit is pungent and unpleasant, and the air from a rose garden is sweet and fragrant, similarly, by the various choices that we make throughout our lives, we create a certain fragrance, you might say, a certain aroma, certain consciousness. And then that consciousness carries us to a suitable body at the time of death. If we fail to cultivate the rarefied, sublime consciousness of Krishna by making Him the center of all our activities, there are 8,400,000 other bodies which complement all the different types of errant desires. The Emperor Akbar once asked his Hindu minister, if a man is a materialistic person and he spends his youth in promiscuity, chasing women and vice versa, does he outgrow that at the time of death? At what point, when the senses get weak and he gets attacked with old age and disease, at what point does one get to wean oneself from sex desire? When Akbar asked that question, the minister didn't give an immediate answer. But a few days later, he indicated to Akbar that if Akbar would like to follow him, he could show him, he could illustrate for him the answer to his question about how long sex desire maintains its grasp on the living being. And Akbar nodded his acquiescence, and the minister led him through the winding streets of Delhi to the doorstep, and they could tell from the markings on the door that inside there was someone dying, an old man, very close to the jaws of death. So the minister, I left out the most important part of the story, the minister indicated that Akbar, who was the king of the known world at that time, very imposing individual, powerful, king-like, imperial, with all of the trappings, crown and robes and untold wealth on his body. The minister asked if Akbar would also bring his 16-year-old daughter, accompany them. So the minister coached Akbar's daughter, and he's so imposing. He's the king. People, as soon as they see him, generally reflexively prostrate themselves at his feet. And here's his daughter, you know, imagine a junior high school cheerleader, 2, 4, 6, 8, who do we appreciate? Fluffy, compared to the minister, the king. So the minister said that when we go into the chamber of this old man, and he sees the two of you, I want you to note where his eyes go. So Akbar walked into the death room, and his little daughter stood beside him, and they watched the eyes. This was an old man in his 90s, gaunt, skeletal, bad odor coming from him, toothless. His eyes went right to the young girl. So the minister made his point. You'd think that in youth, when the senses are strong, you could be promiscuous, be sexually active, I think is the term they call for it. And then at some point when the senses wane and diseases beset one just gets over it. It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen because you've nourished the illicit seed. You've put fuel on the fire. And even in old age, when one no longer has the capabilities of enjoying the opposite sex, still one's pattern of thinking, one's habits are such that one's eyes, one's attention, one's focus all hanker after the enjoyment of a younger body of the opposite sex. So it's not very difficult to see that this old man is hardly in a state of consciousness in which he's going to be liberated. He's not going to get his spiritual body, because your last thoughts at the time of death in this life determine where you end up. The end of this life determines the beginning of your next life. So if he has done nothing more than with the valuable human form of life than simply pursue the opposite sex like any cat or dog, then he's not going to get his spiritual body. He's not going to get liberation. He's not going to get freedom from misery, but he's going to get a body appropriate, a body which will complement his lusty, materialistic consciousness. It's not out of the question that such a person would get the body of a mouse, a rabbit, a deer, or a pigeon. We see these animals prolifically, so many pigeons, so many mice, so many deer. And in those bodies, they get to enjoy the opposite sex, and they produce many, 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 many progeny. However, they are also food for most of the other species. I don't think anybody's ever seen a relaxed, peaceful, calm pigeon. Pigeons can have sex up to 50 times a day, I've heard. So that desire is fulfilled, but no peace, no calmness, no safety, no security. You ever see a pigeon there, always looking, who's coming, where's the fox? Fox is coming on the ground, the raccoon is coming on the ground, possum is coming on the ground. What's coming from the air? The eagle, the hawk. The pigeon is shot full of anxiety. That is the result of one's consciousness from a previous life. Now, Krishna karma, as opposed to pigeon karma, rabbit karma, mice karma, deer karma, is different. The center of one's thinking is Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And for one who works unflinchingly and faithful to Krishna in this life, ascension, elevation to Krishna's lotus feet in the next life is guaranteed. Yasha deve para bhaktir, yata deve tata guru, tasyayati katiti aita, prakasante mahatmanam. Only to those great souls who have implicit faith in both the Lord and the spiritual master are all the imports of Vedic knowledge automatically revealed. One startling example of what one's focus is at the end of one life, determining one's status in the next life, is that of the great warrior king in the Mahabharata, Bhisma. Grandfather Bhisma was senior in age to all the young warriors on the Pandava and Kaurava side. He'd been their martial arts guru. He'd trained them up in the military arts. He was their teacher of both of the youth on both sides of the fence. And he always worked behind the scenes to execute the will of the Lord on this earth. In fact, after the war of Kurukshetra, in which many soldiers lost their lives, Yudhishthira, who was meant to be the king, but who was also very compassionate, soft-hearted, and kind and empathetic, he was heartbroken at the tremendous loss of life, simply in order that he be the king. And he covered himself in guilt and self-accusation, recrimination. He thought, nobody is lower than me, because on account of me, women have become widows, children have become orphans, thousands and thousands of brave, worthy warriors have lost their lives. He felt himself unworthy after all of that to ascend to the throne. Even Krishna tried to get him out of his doldrums and apparently failed. Krishna's failing to perk Yudhishthira up was part of Krishna's plan to then send Yudhishthira to Bhisma for enlightening instruction, for consolation. At that time, Bhisma had been defeated by Arjuna during the battle, but not yet left his body, even though Arjuna had shot many, many arrows through the front and out the back of his body, to the point that Bhisma was lying elevated on the ground by a bed of arrows. He was perforated through and through, should have been in excruciating pain. His mind should have been in a total state of hysteria. But by the mercy of the Lord, having worked on behalf of the Lord, by the mercy of the Lord, Bhisma felt no pain and experienced perfect lucidity of mind. So when Yudhishthira came to Bhisma, being sent by Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, to be instructed and to be given a pep talk, yes, this is all about your being the king. Krishna chose you, and you cannot back down now. It's always been about you being king. And you can't beat yourself up about what it took to get you there. That's on Krishna. It's not on you. You're not becoming king because of your ambition, because of your selfness. No, you're as surrendered to the Lord as I am. We're both surrendered souls to the Lord. So don't assume that you're going onto the throne has anything to do with selfishness, self-karma. This is what Krishna wanted, so it's Krishna karma. The words that finally convinced Yudhishthira, Bhishma said, Tajmaridam devatam tam vyavashabara tasyanabi nahi pai parjupadu. Bhishma said to Arjuna, Yudhishthira, Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who created millions and millions of universes, both material and spiritual, has descended on the earth as the friend and chariot driver of Arjuna during this battle in order that you be elevated to the throne. Because you are the most Krishna conscious candidate, and when you're the king, the way will be cleared for all of your subjects to execute Krishna consciousness and go back to home, back to Godhead. So that was the piece of advice that finally got Yudhishthira with the program, and he reigned for some time and then gave the kingdom over to his equally pious and righteous and Krishna conscious nephew, Parikshit Maharaj. Bhishma was fully Krishna conscious. He supported others in the king, in the throne. He made himself an instrument for the plan of Krishna. And as a result of his full absorption, his full commitment and dedication to Krishna consciousness, what happened to him personally at the time of death? Extraordinary, as described in the Srimad Bhagavatam, 1st canto, 9th chapter, 22nd verse. Tatapi ekanta bhaktishu bhasya bhupana kampitam yanme sinsya jita shakshat Krishna darshanam agata. At the moment of leaving Bhishma's body, his soul exited the body. It exited the body with Krishna standing before him. Knowing that Bhishma was going to leave his body and wanting to give Bhishma, and through Bhishma, all of us, the guarantee from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who never breaks his word, by way of guaranteeing our transition back to home, back to Godhead. On the heels of a lifetime of Krishna conscious activity, Krishna personally came and stood before Bhishma at the moment of leaving his body. Shakshat means, Bhishma said, I'm in his presence. I'm witnessing the original form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Venam kanvantam aravinda tribhuvanam kamaram tamalavaram ravi kura garam varam dadane vapura alaka kuravritanabjam vijaya shakura shtume navajam. That Krishna's color is like the monsoon cloud with raven black hair, lotus eyes, and in that yellow garment is standing before me, giving me his darshan at the time that I am ending my life. Why did Bhishma get so blessed? Because throughout his life he was unflinchingly faithful to the Guru and to the spiritual master. So therefore it says, Prakasyatmiyatmana. Everything became clear to him, just as there are no shadows, there's no darkness underneath the noon sun. And Krishna states throughout the Vedic literatures and throughout the Bhagavad Gita, Samaham sarvabhuteshu namin dveshasina pariham. I'm the father and I'm equally disposed towards all living beings. Just like a father, he wants the best for all of his children. But from amongst his children, those who have unflinching faith in the Father, who trust and who believe in the Father and are willing to act according to the Father's most intimate instructions, the Father has special inclination. He has special favors for those of his sons who cling to me, who look to the Father as their only shelter, their only protection. And when we deviate, when we distance ourselves from God, when we hold him at arm's length, when we're indifferent to him, then that's called fall down. It says the living entity has the tendency to fall down because he can misidentify himself as living independently to the Lord. And thus he becomes attracted to the material world, which is a way that he can act out his fantasies of sovereignty. So real self-identification is Nitya Siddha Krishna Prema. I am eternal servant of Krishna. I have no other duty, I have no responsibility than to just use all of my energies in Krishna karma. Because in benefiting Krishna, I benefit not only myself, but all other living beings. But when one misidentifies oneself as anything other than servant of Krishna, as American, as Hindu, as Indian, as Christian, as black or white, male or female, that is called false ego. So that takes one away from the Lord. And even though we're of the same nature as the Lord, Satchidananda, full of knowledge, bliss, and eternity, because we don't have the power of the Lord, because our power, unlike his, is limited power, we can become influenced. In fact, it could be said we're prone to be influenced by the Lord's external energy, covered and conditioned and incarcerated by matter. The Lord is said to be Vibhu. That means omniscient, omnipotent. But we ourselves are Anu. We are infinitesimal. We're atomic. And just like the Lord has free will, the Lord has independence, we also have free will to a certain extent. And the Lord intimates what we want. He intimates what we want. Just like you can smell the flavor of a flower, even if you're blindfolded, by the sense of smell, you can tell this is a rose, these are frangipanis, this is a gardenia, these are jasmine. Even without seeing, you can just by the aroma of the flower tell what kind of a flower it is. So simply the Lord, who never abandons us, who always accompanies us as the Paramatma or the Super Soul, he always intimates the desires of the living being. On our part, desire is the subtle form of conditioning ourselves. The Lord knows whether we desire to shelter and to serve, or whether we desire to separate from him. Again, man proposes and God disposes. And being neutral, the Lord does not interfere with the desires of the minute, independent living beings. However, when one desires Krishna, then the Lord becomes especially alert, takes special attention, and especially encourages one's desires in that direction and helps one ultimately to become a liberated soul. It says in the Bhagavad Gita, Song of the Supreme, Krishna streams to his team member Arjuna, the cream of the devotees. Arjuna, the things you do every day, the gifts you give, and every tasty veggie dish, offer them to me with love and see your soul enriched. A cup of water makes me smile, though I could drink an ocean of flower, fruit, and leaf are fine, if they're offered in devotion. Keeping me in the center, this is Krishna karma. Keeping me in the center, your karma will never interfere, because loving devotional service is the dharma of the spiritual atmosphere. We're prone to misuse our free will. We're prone, out of curiosity, to see what it would be like to live independent of the Lord. And therefore, we have become, throughout many, many incarnations, expert in avoiding Krishna consciousness, and therefore have been the cause of our own misery, our own suffering, our own bewilderment. The first step towards rehabilitation is to accept responsibility, to acknowledge that although we're constitutionally, that Krishna, out of infinite love for us, created us indestructible, eternal, blissful, and cognizant due to the, what Prabhupada calls the littleness of our existence, we forget our constitutional position of service to the Lord, and we've entrapped ourselves in nescience, just like a worm entraps itself in its own cocoon. And under the spell of ignorance, the living entity, then we cause our own misery, we cause our own suffering, and as long as we're immature enough to blame that misery and suffering on other people, on other circumstances, or even to blame it on the Lord, we're going to continue in the conditional existence of birth, disease, death, disease, and old age. The whole reformatory process is to remember the Lord, remember our role in connection with him, and accept responsibility for our actions. It was when we dodged responsibility that we fell and became entrapped in this material world. It says, Krishna Baliya Se Jiva Bahir Adir Mukha Taiva Maya Tarideya Samsaraduga. Our troubles began when we forgot our constitutional position as servants to Krishna. As soon as we did that, we became captured by the false, egotistical notion that we're the enjoyer and that we can live separately from the Supreme Lord. That's what threw us into the material nature and caused us to be conditioned by birth, disease, old age. And we found by bitter experience throughout millions and millions of incarnations and years in this material world that associated with the material energy is extremely troublesome. It's anathema to our eternal, blissful, cognizant selves. We and the Lord are the same. To the Lord, matter and spirit are non-different. He's like the electrician that can use electricity to cool or to heat. But to us, there's a big difference between being in the spiritual atmosphere and the material atmosphere. But when we become involved in Krishna karma, then such a devoted soul no longer finds disturbance in the fluctuations, the dualities, the hot and cold of this material world. One learns how to use both the material and spiritual energy in the service of the Lord. Prabhupada gives the example that the government has various departments. It has the criminal department, has the civil department. Now, the criminal department and the civil department may have different purposes, may appear differently in the eyes of the citizens, but from the point of view of the government, they're both one and the same. From the point of view of the citizen, the criminal department is very troublesome for the citizen, but it is not at all troublable for the obedient, law-abiding member of the community. So similarly, the devotee being law-abiding, being God-centered, acting in harmony with his constitutional position, the purpose for which he's created, then karma is no longer troublesome for him. Karma backs off and releases its grip. We just celebrated on the 11th of August, actually it was just a week ago today, Janmashtami, the appearance day of Lord Krishna. And that's a very, very powerful occasion. It comes annually to remember Krishna, to remember his omnipotency, to remember his supremacy, and to recall that he doesn't come into this material world being forced to arrive here due to the circumstances of karma, action and reaction. He comes due to his own sweet will to give us a glimpse of the spiritual world and encourage us to go back to home, back to Godhead. This is a concluding paragraph by Prabhupada here. The conclusion is that both the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the jivas, the living entities, both enter into this material world. However, the Paramatma, or Supreme Personality of Godhead, unlike us, is worshipable because he is arranged for the happiness of the living entity in the material world. However, the so-called happiness of the material world is temporary and subject to loss, whereas spiritual enjoyment in the service of the Lord means pure enjoyment under the protection of his sheltering lotus feet. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Thanks again for all of those who have watched us. I'm seeing Prashant and Sachi and Varsana, and I remember Anjali and Govinda Dev, Sundari Priya came across the screen at one point. Usually Bill joined us, Rupa Manjari, Anjali, of course. TT it was today, Thomas. Thomas's comment, acting in harmony with our constant position as servants of Krishna, is called Krishna Karma. Thank you so much. And let me also mention our great appreciation of Thomas and Bill in particular, who at that aforementioned Janmashtami celebration last Tuesday became generous sponsors of Kalashas, which helps us out a great deal in these lean times. Taruni, Jimmy and Taruni Divine from Minnesota, also have been so kind as to recently send a donation through PayPal. And Kusham also, Kusham Demon, sent us a nice card, a wonderful card of friendship with a donation check inside there. So thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for making these wonderfully interactive and enlivening sessions. Thank you for your support. We're indebted to you to a point that we can only try to discharge that debt by reminding you to always chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Rama, Hare Hare. We'll see you tomorrow morning for Wisdom Wednesday.